Alright, welcome back. Let's go ahead and try to finish out the rest of the katana. So we have the sheath that's left over here. So let's start by first selecting our sheath texture set. Click solo. Going to isolate our sheath geometry. And here under our layers palette, Substance Painter creates this layer 1 by default. So go ahead and just trash that. Next thing we want to double check is under our texture set settings. Let's make sure we're working out of 2K. Currently it's 4K. Let's change that to 2K. And then now we have this blank layer palette. Let's go ahead and create a folder here and call this leather sheath. And it looks like I forgot an H in there. Alright, so now what we want to do is add a black mask, and we're going to select all the geometry that corresponds to our leather sheath part. And let's Alt left click there, go into polygon fill mode, and let's select that geometry. Let's make sure we're also working out of UV chunk fill. I think I was in polygon fill. Alright, so we've got all that selected now. Let's hit M on our keyboard to jump out of that and go back to our material here. Next we want to go to our shelf and go to materials here and search for artificial leather. It's going to be our base color for our leather material. Let's drop that in. Alright, so we have that in place. Let's go ahead and add a fill layer on top of that. And for our fill layer, we're going to put in a color here that I found worked well for this material. So that value is 0.277 for red, and for our green, it's going to be 104, and for blue, 057. Okay. And this kind of looks weird at first, but we're going to add some filters to kind of create the effect we're going for. So this layer is going to control the wear and tear effect of the leather. And you'll see that it'll look pretty good once we're done with this. So let's go ahead and start by adding a black mask. Select the mask, go up to our effects drop down here, and choose add fill. Next, let's go into our shelf here again and go to procedurals. And we're going to search for something called grunge dirt thin. Let's pull this grunge dirt thin into our grayscale uniform color slot here. And you can see that it gives us a very nice worn leather effect. However, we have this seam right down the middle, so we're going to use, under projection, we're going to change that to triplanar projection. And let's go ahead and increase our UV scale to 2, and that'll give us a little resolution there. So that finishes out our base leather for our sheath. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to add some stitches and a seam, kind of this double stitching effect and a seam down the middle. It's kind of a nice cool effect you can work with here in Substance, so I'll show you how to do that. Let's make sure this layer is properly set up first. One thing we want to do is make sure metalness is checked off, because we're not using, this isn't a metallic material. And I think the rest of these should be fine. Let's go ahead and rename this to, we can call this worn leather. Let's add another fill layer on top of this layer. And let's right click on it and add a black mask. And we're going to call this layer stitches. Okay. And let's change our color here too to something more of a stitch color that we're going to use. We don't really need to lock this in right now, but we'll just kind of get it in the ballpark. So I'm just sampling kind of this brown color right here. Go with something like that. And then we want to go to our height channel. And so if I pull my height this way, it's going to make whatever we draw in here kind of push in. If I go this way, it's going to pop up out of the surface. So we want our stitches to be kind of pushing up. So I'm going to put in a value of around 0.265, see where that gets us. And next we're going to go click on our mask that we created. And And let's go to the top of our toolbar here and make sure we have a paint toolbar or paint tool selected. And let's go to our shelf again and go to brushes. And here at the target line, type in stitches. And we want the stitches small. It's going to work well for us. You can see that changes our brush icon to the stitch. And let's try to find a size that will work for our stitches. I think 0.27 should be, yeah, that should work. Let's kind of look at how that is projecting on there. Doesn't look too bad, and it's going to read a lot better from a distance. And also keep in mind we're looking at this in 2K, so it's going to look a little low resolution. So now what we want to do is, now that we have our stitch size established, let's go ahead and jump into a split view. So F1 will do that for us. And we want to come down to this part right here, which is this area in here. And the reason we're working in a 2D view is it allows us to draw these stitch lines more accurately. So if I left click once, hold shift down, it brings out this preview line. And if I hold control down while still holding shift, it allows me to constrain that line. So I'm very easily able to just draw a straight line like that. So I'll go ahead and do that again. So if I left click, hold shift down, brings out this line, hold control down, it constrains it, and then I'm going to hit left click to paint that information in. So we get a nice stitch line kind of along this edge. And sometimes it doesn't quite finish the stitch. You can either just kind of just paint that in by holding left click, and that doesn't usually produce very good results. So usually you just want to come back and undo a few steps and reapply that stitch. So I'll just repeat it again, see if we get a cleaner. And see, that time it came out a lot cleaner. So we'll make that our first stitch line. I'm going to come over here a little bit more to the left, add a little space in between it. So we have something like that, and you can see it did that again. Let's see, that kind of, let's see, I hate when this happens. Yeah, so if you have this problem where you've rotated it like this, go ahead and hold Alt down and then hold Shift. That'll constrain it back to a square view. Let's go ahead and undo that. And let's reapply that. And that's a little better like that. Okay, and so my idea is with these stitches is we're going to have like a seam line down the middle, and it's going to kind of create the effect of, you know, this material or this leather being stitched on somehow. So let's go ahead and call those stitches good. Let's move down to this area. Yeah, it doesn't really want to pan very well for me. Okay, and I believe that's right here. Let's just double check. We can always just draw right here. You can see that updates in our 2D view. I'm going to undo that, and let's go ahead and drop our first stitch line. Maybe about right there. Let's double check it. Yep, see, that one didn't do a very good job, so we'll redraw it. I think that'll work for that. And let's try to keep it about the same distance we did before in that last one. So about here. And let's drop one here. All right. And you'll notice that we kind of hit the top right here. We'll go back and clean that up. So don't be worried about putting stitches on these parts. So we've got our stitches in place. Next thing we're going to do is add our seams. So let's go ahead and create a new fill over here in our layer palette. Let's rename that to seam and add a black mask. And then for here, we're going to change our color to more of a darker area. So maybe sample this area up here. And let's change our height. And we want our height pushing in, so we're going to drop our height down this way to maybe something around let's try about -0.3. And for this, we're going to use another brush. It's going to be called Straight line, I think. Just type in line. It's called sharp line. So we want sharp line. Make sure we're working out of brush, and that we have our mask. So anytime as we're painting these stitches and these lines in, we're working out of our mask, and that basically reveals that material, creating these effects that we're seeing here. Okay, so let's make sure our mask is selected, and we've got our straight line. So now we just kind of want to figure out, looks like straight line wasn't selected. Still referencing the stitches. So let's go ahead and decide on the width we want for our brush. I'm just going to kind of preview this. I think that'll work. That's about the right width. Alright, so I'm using a size of 0.44. And I'm just going to draw a straight line right between these stitches. Not quite wasn't in the middle, so I'm going to come back here and try to do it again. That one still looks like it's a little off. It's a little hard to do this, just because you have to be scaled out quite a bit to see the UVs. So it just takes a little bit of practice, but eventually you'll get it. Let's go ahead over here. So that's going to do it for that area. All right, so right here. See, so we're just trying to, you can see there's this little brush indicator. So I'm just trying to kind of balance it or center between our stitch line there as best we can. And that time I didn't have the UVs all on screen there, so I just moved the camera a little bit. And that's not going to work, so let's go ahead and move it a little more to the left. That seems like that's a better projection like that. Okay, so we've got those in place. Kind of adds a nice visual effect there. So next what we want to do is create our bronze parts, which are going to be this and the piece on the end. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to collapse this leather sheath. Let's create a new folder. Sure, it's at the top of our stack here. We'll call it bronze parts. And we'll add a black mask. Let's go into polygon fill here. You can also paint masks with the paintbrush, and we were working out of paintbrush, so make sure that we want polygon fill as we're selecting our mask here. Let's go into mask mode here and UV chunk fill, and let's select these. Like I selected that one by mistake. I'll just drop this to black, deselect that. All right. Okay, so that's going to do it for those parts. Hit M to go to material mode and switch back to our. And we don't need to be working out a split view now, so you can hit F2. That'll put you back into 3D view. And let's go ahead and search for our bronze material. Should be under Smart Materials. And drop that right on top of our bronze parts. Okay, and we're going to want to adjust this. You can see there's that issue again with the edge wears. So we'll just go ahead and go to this edge damage layer and delete that. That clears that up for us. Now what we're left with, actually before we proceed with that, we need to also get this piece right here. So I'm going to go back into our bronze parts pieces, our material, and select this piece in here. Sure we get this in here as well. There we go. Okay. So for these straps, did a little experimenting and found a nice procedural texture we can use for that. So we're going to utilize that. So to do that, we're going to create a new group, and we'll call this straps. And let's go ahead and I think we're going to have multiple straps just because of the way the UVs are laid out. Let's go ahead and take a look at that actually. So if I hit F1. You can see that when we were organizing these in our 0 to 1 space, they're kind of rotated to fit into certain spots. So when we apply our texture, it's going to use that rotation of our UV shell and cause issues of how that texture is going to be projecting. So we're going to have to address these individually, some of them at least. Let's start with these bottom 3, which I think are going to be the easiest to texture. So I'm going to go hit F1 on our keyboard, sorry, F2. And let's create let's call this straps 1. And let's add a black mask to that layer. And let's go into our mask mode here and just select these. I might actually let's try a mesh fill on these. Yeah, mesh fill is doing really well with these, so it's grabbing all those inner pieces there, so I'm going to have to individually go in and select those. We have our first set of straps selected. Next thing we're going to do is create a fill layer. Go ahead and drop that in there. And we're going to change its color. Let's see here. I think for these ones, so for red, we're going to go with 0.34, so 0.034, and green is 0.19, and blue 0.009. Okay, that's going to be our color for the wraps. Next thing we want to do is here under our height field, we're going to place that procedural texture. Let's go ahead and find that. It's going to be under our procedurals. I don't recall the name of it, so let's go ahead and pull this up a little bit and see if we can find it. Okay, here it is. It's called Fibers 2. So let's go ahead and click on that. Pull that into our height field here. And you see by default, it doesn't quite give us the result we're wanting. So what we want to do is go to our pattern here. This will give us a starting point. Let's increase the value to 16. Okay. And our UV rotation is still off, so I'm going to come up here to our rotation and rotate it, say 90 degrees. And it's still a little too large, so we're going to continue to scale it a little bit more. So see what a value, say maybe a value of 3 probably would work well for us. Now the problem is this height map is just a little too much. If I hit C on the keyboard a few times, so we're looking at the normal map, you can see that this normal map's really clamping. It's just a little too much information there. So what we'll do is let's click on that and let's create a levels, add a levels. And let's change our affected channel to our height channel. And we just want to decrease some of these values till we get kind of a more uniform scale. And it might actually be easier to look at this. Let's go ahead and hit C a few times again. Let's look at our height. I think we can just select it here actually. Let's look at our height map. You can see it's a very, it goes from black to white, and it's a very big jump there. So let's go ahead and try to make this a little more uniform. So I'm just pulling this slider down a little bit. That actually might just be able to do the trick just like that. I'm going to hit C or M to reveal our material. It's a little more subtle having it like that. Next thing I want to do is let's go to, actually I think we don't have ambient occlusion added because we haven't really done much with ambient occlusion. So if we go to our texture set settings, there's this channels option here. We're going to hit this plus arrow and let's go ahead and click on ambient occlusion. If I can find it. Oh, I was right on top of it. Top of the list there. I was looking else everywhere but there. Okay, so that that gives us the option to now add that ambient occlusion to our slot. So let's go ahead and click that on our material. And then let's go ahead and bring up our shelf, and somehow that got taken out. So if that happens to you, you can always come up here to Window and say Reset UI. That just brings everything back to a default. And let's go ahead and grab that Fibers 2. And we're going to drop that into our ambient occlusion slot. It's down here. And that's just going to allow, that's going to make this material pop a little bit more. We also need to adjust our pattern to 16 so it matches up. And I'll just show you kind of the difference between what we had and what we have now. So if I turn this on and off, you can see it kind of pushes that material a little bit more. Now we have the problem of this being a little too reflective. So let's go ahead and adjust some of these values. Let's turn metalness off because we don't need that. And let's adjust our roughness into the white range. Now it's reading more like straps. We come out here from this distance, it looks a lot more like straps. And I think that's going to work. So I'll maybe just tune this a little bit more. Something about like that. Alright, so we've got our material built out for our straps, and now we just need to apply that to the rest of these parts. So let's go ahead and maybe start with these next, and hopefully those won't be too much work to adjust. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this, Control D. Let's go ahead and clear the mask on that. Go into mask mode here and select, let's go into UV chunk fill and select all these pieces here. And we might actually be able to do this with mesh. Yeah, mesh fill works pretty well for that. I was able to grab all of that geometry there. And let's see how this texture is projecting on here. And for this one, it doesn't look like it wants to play nice. And I'm looking at this, you can see the pattern here is going more horizontally, and then in here it's more vertical. I'm going to see if I can throw a, see if we go into our material here again. And let's go to projection method and change it to triplanar. See if we can get this all facing the same direction. Now it's the values of the scale has changed, so I'm going to increase the scale a little bit. See how that looks. Okay. I think a value maybe closer to 8 might match up better with that. Okay. That seems to be looking alright. Alright, so that addresses that piece. So let's go ahead and maybe we might be able to get this piece too here. I'm going to actually try to apply that to our mask. Just going to use mesh fill again. Let's jump out here. That looks like it grabbed it. Alright, so that takes care of that piece too. And let's make sure we rename this properly, call that straps 2. And next, let's go ahead and duplicate this. Add a black mask. And I want to see if we can maybe get this whole top row too. So let's go ahead and select all that. I'm not working out of mask mode this way. And it looks like in our case for these pieces, the triplanar just doesn't know how to reorganize the texture to work well for us in this scenario. So we're going to change our fill layer back to UV projection, and that changes the scale, so let's bring it back to 3. Okay, and it looks like some of these are going to work for us, but others aren't, so that one's a little more vertical. Let's try to see if we can address some of the ones that will work for us. So I'm going to go, let's see, we probably need to drop our rotation back to 0. You can see that this piece, and this piece work, but these two just aren't working very well, so we're going to have to address those pieces individually. So I'm going to go into our mask mode here, select the black, and deselect these two pieces. Okay. And let's go ahead and address this one separately. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this to strap 3 and hit Control D to duplicate it. Rename this to 4. Add a black mask and select just this piece. And let's go into our fill layer here and rotate it to where it works well for us on that strap. Looks like the mirrored UVs isn't working too well in this area, fortunately. Yeah, I think it'd be better just to keep it straight so we can keep that looking a little better. And it doesn't look too bad. Yeah, this seam though right here is a little problematic. We could, if you wanted to, you could go, like if you got these lined up perfectly, you could export the normal map, bring it into Mudbox, and then just try to paint that seam out. But I think because I know the way it's going to be rendered mostly from a view like this, that really isn't going to be too problematic. So just got to know when to pick your battles, you know, what's good enough. All right, so let's go ahead and address this piece too. So I'm going to duplicate that, rename this to strap 5. Let's go ahead and add a black mask to that again and just select this piece. And let's rotate it. Something about like that. That'll work. Okay, so that takes care of that piece. So let's see how these respond now if we mask them all together. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this, rename this to strap 6. We put a space there. Our mask, and select this geometry in here. Yeah. Might be able to get away with the middle one. I'd be able to get away with all 3 of these actually right on this side. You just deselect this side over here. So we're working. There we go. Wasn't wanting to select there for a second. All right. Now let's see if we can adjust this rotation a little better. Yeah, that's not too bad. I mean, if I had a little more time, I'd probably, we could spend more time doing this stuff, but I'd probably isolate this one as one and this one, and then get these perfectly aligned a little better. But I don't want to keep this video too long, so we'll just keep it like that. And let's go ahead and create another duplicate. And let's go ahead and name that strap 7. And make a black mask for that. And let's select these 2 pieces here. And let's come over here to our material and rotate them. And we might need to have we might need to have an independent one for this, unfortunately. Right now I'm just focusing on getting that one right. And we'll call that good on that one. Let's go ahead and control duplicate this, rename this to straps 8. Add a black mask, select this piece here. Interesting. I zero this out again. It's responding very odd. And I think it's because on our bottom layer here, we need to change this to not be part of that material anymore. That was what was going on. So let's go ahead and reset the rotation on this one. And for the most part, this is pretty repetitive, so I'm just going to go ahead and address these pieces on the other side, just so this video isn't too long. So I'll go ahead and fix those pieces to a point where we have this finished, and then really isn't much more actually after we have completed this. The texturing process has been completed at that point, so we might just go over how to export the textures and bring them into Marmoset or another program. So I'm going to go ahead and just speed up the video now and just address these last few pieces. Alright, so that's going to do it for the banding. I think it turned out pretty well. Let's go ahead and take a look at everything here together. And I think it looks pretty good. So at this point now, let's go ahead and save our scene. And like I was saying before, everything in our document is currently authored, or all of our texture sets are set to 4K. So we want to make sure when we're exporting that we're not exporting things that don't need to be 4K. So for instance, this piece right here, 4K is a lot of resolution to dedicate to this piece. We could probably even get away with 1K on that. So what we can do is change our, let's go ahead and just isolate our blade guard, solo that, and let's change it. So right now it's looking at a 2K map. Let's see what 1K looks like. Doesn't look half bad. And you could probably get, if you're working in a game pipeline, you definitely want to exceed past 1K for a piece like this. Just because we're doing a render though, I think I'll drop this to 2K. So when we export this now, I'm going to make sure that we use 2K for that piece. So what you want to do now is, let's go up to our export options. So we'll go to export textures, and we're going to want to check on all of our pieces, all of our texture sets here. And then here under configure, this is where you would choose your presets for whatever program you're working out of. In our case, we're going to be previewing this in Marmoset. So I'm going to be choosing this spec gloss from Metal Rough. That seems to generate the best maps for that render engine. And here we can choose how we want to output these files as, right? So we know we want our blade guard to be 2K, so we'll keep that at 2K. And for the Katana main, we want it to be a 4K map, and the sheath, we're definitely going to want that to be a 4K map. So once you have all those established, the last thing you want to do is make sure that you create maybe a folder here for textures. So I'm going to go into here for substance, and just create a new folder, and maybe just call it textures. Select that, and just go ahead and hit export. It's going to export all of our textures out. This might take a little bit of time, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here while it does that. Alright, so all of our textures are now exported. Next thing we should do is go into Windows Explorer here. This has all of our files that were exported. And just to make it easier on ourselves to bring this into a program and identify these files a lot easier. We're going to break them, create folders for each of these texture sets and place those files in there. So let's go ahead and start with the Katana main. So I'm just going to create a folder, call it Katana _ main. And I'm going to go up here to our search bar and just type main. It's going to grab everything that corresponds to main, pull that into our Katana main folder, back up here, and let's do our guard maybe next. So I'll just call this one guard. Search for guard. Pull those ones inside there. Back up here, and then let's see, we've got the sheath left over. So just type sheath. Search for, actually we don't need to search for them because they're just the last ones left over, and we can just pull them into that folder. Now we can move into Marmoset, this is where we're gonna display our model with those textures on it. I'm gonna come up here to File, let's just create a new scene, and let's go ahead and import in our model. And I'm just gonna go into our substance directory, come into our import folder, and load in our Katana low, which we did all of our texture work on in the Substance Painter. That loads everything in, and it conveniently brings in materials for us to use. However, these materials are set up incorrectly, so we can't use them. That's unfortunate. So I'm just going to go ahead and just delete these materials it created for us and start with some new ones. Default, you can't delete. That's just a default one that Marmoset creates. Let's go up here and just create a new material, and we'll call this first one Katana _ main. And let's go ahead and just load in these maps. So I'm going to start with the Katana main. Let's go to textures here. So Katana main, start with the normal map. We've got our gloss map and our diffuse map, which Marmoset calls albedo. A lot of programs actually call the diffuse. There's actually another diffusal slot here, but this is really just our diffuse map. We'll go for that. And for reflectivity, we want our specular map. And now we just want to pull these on to the corresponding pieces. And you could group this if you wanted to make it a little easier, so you could just pull it onto the group, but fortunately that wasn't set up. I'm just going to pull these materials onto their respected pieces. Alright, almost there. Okay, that's going to take care of Katana main. Let's go ahead and create another material, and maybe we'll do the blade guard next. So let's rename this to, we can just call it guard. And let's load in the normal map for that. Glossiness. And specular. And just pull that right on where it goes. Alright. One left. Make sure we don't click that because that duplicates your material. We want a new material. And we'll call this sheath. You might notice I'm clicking on this flip Y, and that's just because of the normal map. We want it to flip the green channel, so we're clicking flip Y. So our normal map displays properly. And our specular. And we're going to have to pull these on each of these pieces, fortunately. It's going to make whoever's watching this pretty dizzy, I bet. So you might want to just speed this up, where I might just speed this up so you don't have to see me moving this back and forth. Okay, got this piece on the end. Alright, so that has all of our materials applied. They look pretty good. This HDR map we're using is a little too dark, so we could go maybe into our, let's see, sky here and choose a different preset. Let's see, we could maybe go for late day field. Doesn't look too bad. You can also come into your Yeah, you can come over here and change this to color if you don't want the HDR background in the image, and then maybe change this to a darker color. Let's change it to a black color like that. And then shift and right click, just like in Substance Painter, allows you to move the HDR around. But yeah, it turned out pretty nice. That's going to conclude this video. Hope you enjoyed the video. I was tired through a lot of it, but hopefully you gained some knowledge on how to recreate something similar to this. So I'll be probably doing some more videos in the future, so stay tuned for those videos. But thanks again for watching.